My name is Sarah, and this happened when I was 11 years old at my childhood home in rural Oregon. We had this incredible treehouse in our backyard that my dad had built the summer before. It wasn't just some basic platform nailed to a tree. It was like something out of a storybook, complete with windows, a proper roof, and even a small porch. The treehouse was positioned about 15 feet up in this massive oak tree at the edge of our property. From up there, you could see across our entire backyard and into the woods that stretched for miles behind our house. It was my absolute favorite place to spend time, especially during the summer when school was out. I should probably mention that our house was pretty isolated. We were at the end of a long dirt driveway, and our nearest neighbors were almost a mile away. My parents loved the privacy, but looking back, I realize how vulnerable that made us. This story takes place in late August, right before I was supposed to start 6th grade. I had been having trouble sleeping in my bedroom because it got so hot and stuffy at night, even with the window open. The treehouse, on the other hand, was always cool and breezy because it was up in the canopy where the air moved freely. I asked my parents if I could sleep out there for a few nights, and after some discussion they said yes. My mum packed me a sleeping bag, pillow and flashlight, and my dad made sure I had his whistle in case I needed help during the night. The first night went perfectly. I fell asleep listening to the sounds of the forest and woke up feeling more rested than I had in weeks. I was so excited about it that I convinced my parents to let me do it again the following night. The second night started out the same way. I climbed up to the treehouse around 9 p.m., got comfortable in my sleeping bag, and was reading a book by flashlight when I heard something that made me freeze. It was the sound of someone walking around the base of the tree, slow, deliberate footsteps in the dried leaves and twigs that had fallen from the oak tree. At first I thought maybe it was my dad checking on me, but when I looked down through the small window, I couldn't see anyone. I called out softly, "Dad, is that you?" But there was no response. The footsteps stopped completely, and everything went silent. I waited for maybe 10 minutes, listening carefully, but didn't hear anything else. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been a deer or some other animal, and went back to reading. Around midnight, I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it again. This time, the footsteps were definitely human. I could tell by the rhythm and the way they seemed to be deliberately circling the tree. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it down toward the ground, but the beam wasn't strong enough to reach that far in the darkness. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice calling up to me from below. "Sarah," it said in a sing-song tone. "Sarah, are you up there?" It wasn't my dad's voice. It wasn't my mom's voice. It was a man's voice, but one I didn't recognize. The tone was friendly, almost playful, but something about it made every instinct in my body scream that something was wrong. I didn't respond. I just lay there in my sleeping bag, trying to control my breathing and hoping whoever it was would go away. "I know you're up there, Sarah," the voice continued. "I can see your little light. Why don't you come down and say hello?" That's when I realized this person knew my name. They had been watching me, probably for longer than I wanted to think about. I reached for the whistle my dad had given me, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip it. "I have something for you," the voice said, and I could hear that the person had moved to a different side of the tree. "Something I think you'll really like, but you have to come down to get it." I finally found the courage to speak. "Go away!" I shouted as loudly as I could. "My parents are right inside the house." There was a moment of silence, and then I heard something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. The person below started laughing. Not a normal laugh, but this high-pitched, almost childlike giggling that seemed to go on forever. While they were laughing, I heard a new sound that made my stomach drop, the creaking of wood under pressure. Someone was climbing up the tree. I blew the whistle as hard as I could over and over again, while scrambling to the far corner of the treehouse. Through the small window, I could see a dark shape moving up the trunk of the tree, using the same handholds and footholds that I used during the day. The lights in my house came on, and I heard my dad shouting my name from the back door. The climbing sounds stopped immediately, and I heard someone drop to the ground and run off into the woods. My dad reached the treehouse about 2 minutes later, and I was sobbing so hard I could barely explain what had happened. The police came out the next morning and found footprints around the base of the tree, along with what looked like scratch marks in the bark where someone had been climbing. They searched the woods, but never found any sign of who it might have been. We moved away from that house 6 months later. My parents said it was because of my dad's job, but I always suspected it had more to do with that night in the treehouse. I'm 28 now, and I still have nightmares about that voice calling my name from the darkness below. This happened when I was 13, living with my family in a small town in upstate New York. We had just moved into this old Victorian house that came with what the realtor called charming period features, including a treehouse that had been built decades earlier by previous owners. The treehouse was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was massive, built into and around 3 different trees, with multiple rooms connected by narrow wooden bridges. It looked like something you might see in a fantasy movie, all weathered wood and twisted branches. My younger brother Tyler, who was 9 at the time, was absolutely obsessed with it from day one. He would spend hours up there every day after school, and most of his weekend time as well. At first, my parents and I were happy that he had found something he enjoyed so much, especially since the move had been hard on him. But after a few weeks, Tyler started talking about the other children he was playing with in the treehouse. When my parents asked him about his new friends, he would get vague and say they were kids from the neighborhood who liked to play up there. The thing was, we hadn't met any neighborhood kids yet. Our house was pretty isolated, and the few families with children lived too far away for them to just wander into our backyard. But Tyler insisted that these kids were real, and that they were his friends. My parents asked me to keep an eye on Tyler and see if I could figure out who these mysterious playmates were. So one afternoon, I decided to spy on him from my bedroom window, which had a perfect view of the treehouse. I watched Tyler climb up to the treehouse around 3 p.m., just like he did every day. But this time, instead of playing alone like I expected, I could see him moving around up there as if he was interacting with other people. He would pause and seem to listen to something, then respond out loud, then move to a different area of the treehouse like he was following someone. This went on for about an hour. Tyler was clearly engaged in some kind of elaborate game with what appeared to be multiple other children, but from my vantage point, I could see the entire treehouse structure, and Tyler was definitely alone up there. That evening, I confronted Tyler about what I had seen. I told him I knew he was playing by himself and asked him why he was pretending to have friends up there. Tyler got really upset and insisted that the other children were real. He said their names were Emma, Lucas, and Mira, and that they had been playing in the treehouse long before we moved in. He also told me something that made me uncomfortable. According to Tyler, these children had told him that they lived in the treehouse, and that the house we had moved into used to be their house too. They had supposedly died in a fire that burned down the original house on the property, and the treehouse was the only part that survived. I didn't believe any of this, of course. I figured Tyler was just having trouble adjusting to the move and had created these imaginary friends to help him cope. But I decided to do some research just to be sure. What I found at the local library made my blood run cold. In 1987, a family named Morrison had lived on our property. Their house had indeed burned down in an electrical fire, killing 3 children: Emma Morrison, age 8, Lucas Morrison, age 10, and Mira Morrison, age 6. The original house had been rebuilt in the exact same location, which was now our house. And according to the newspaper articles, the children had been found in their bedrooms, overcome by smoke in their sleep. But there was no mention of a treehouse in any of the articles I could find. I didn't tell Tyler what I had learned. Instead, I decided to spend some time in the treehouse myself to see if I could figure out what was really going on. The next Saturday, I climbed up there while Tyler was at a friend's house. The treehouse was much larger than it appeared from the ground, with 4 separate rooms connected by those wooden bridges. Each room had different items in it: old toys, books, even some clothes that looked like they had been there for years. In the largest room, I found something that made me want to leave immediately. Carved into one of the wooden walls were 3 names: Emma, Lucas, and Mira. Below each name was a date: 1987. I was staring at these carvings when I heard footsteps on one of the wooden bridges. I assumed Tyler had come home early, but when I turned around, I saw 3 children I didn't recognize standing in the doorway. The oldest was a boy who looked about 10 with dark hair and clothes that seemed old-fashioned. Next to him was a girl who might have been 8, with blonde pigtails and a dress that looked like something from the 1980s. The youngest was another girl, maybe 6 years old, wearing a pink sweater that was too big for her. All 3 of them were staring at me with expressions I can't really describe. Not angry, not sad, just expectant, like they had been waiting for me to show up. "You must be Tyler's sister," the oldest boy said. His voice sounded normal, but there was something about it that made the hair on my arms stand up. "He talks about you all the time." "We're his friends," the blonde girl added. "We've been waiting for someone new to play with." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at these 3 children who couldn't possibly be real, but were somehow standing right in front of me. The youngest girl stepped forward and reached out her hand toward me. "Do you want to stay and play with us? We know all the best games." That's when I noticed that her hand was ice cold, and I could see through it to the wooden wall behind her. I ran. I pushed past them and stumbled across the wooden bridge, then practically fell down the ladder to the ground. I ran into the house and locked the door behind me, and I didn't come out for the rest of the day. When Tyler got home, I told him everything. Instead of being scared, he seemed excited that I had finally met his friends. He said they had told him I would be able to see them eventually, and that they were hoping I would start playing with them too. I begged my parents to tear down the treehouse, but they thought I was just being dramatic. They said I was probably just stressed about the move and seeing things that weren't there. But Tyler kept playing up there every day, and sometimes I would see him talking to empty air, laughing at jokes only he could hear. And occasionally, late at night, I would look out my window and see lights moving around in the treehouse, even though Tyler was asleep in his bed. We lived in that house for 2 more years. I never went back up to the treehouse, and I never saw those 3 children again. But Tyler continued to play with them until the day we moved away. On our last day in the house, he spent hours up there saying goodbye to Emma, Lucas, and Mira. When we drove away, I looked back at the treehouse one last time. For just a moment, I could swear I saw 3 small figures standing on the main platform waving goodbye. I'm 35 now, but this happened when I was 16 and babysitting for the Henderson family. They lived in this big house on the outskirts of town, and they had twin boys who were 7 years old named Jake and Sam. The boys were pretty well behaved, but they were obsessed with their treehouse, which was this elaborate structure their dad had built in the backyard. Mrs. Henderson had hired me to watch the boys on Friday nights, so she and her husband could go out for date nights. It was a regular gig for about 6 months, and everything was always routine. I'd arrive around 6 p.m., help with dinner, get the boys ready for bed by 8:30, and then just hang out until the Hendersons came home around 11. The boys always wanted to play in the treehouse during the time between dinner and bedtime, and I was fine with that. It kept them occupied and happy, and I could see them from the kitchen window while I cleaned up. But there was something about that treehouse that always bothered me. It was really well built, with proper walls and even electricity, so the boys could use a lamp up there when it got dark. But there were these 2 small windows on opposite sides, and whenever I looked at them from inside the house, I always felt like someone was looking back at me. I know that sounds paranoid, but it was this persistent feeling I couldn't shake. Even when I knew the boys weren't up there, I would catch myself glancing at those windows and feeling like I was being watched. One Friday night in October, Mrs. Henderson mentioned that they might be a little later than usual because they were going to a movie after dinner. She said the boys could stay up a bit past their normal bedtime if they wanted, which they were excited about. After the Hendersons left, the boys immediately asked if they could go play in the treehouse. It was already starting to get dark, but they had the lamp up there and I figured it would be fine for an hour or so. I watched them climb up and turn on the light, then went back to the kitchen to finish cleaning up from dinner. I could hear them laughing and playing, which was normal, but after about 20 minutes I realized I was only hearing one voice. I looked out the window and could see the light was still on in the treehouse, but I could only see one boy moving around inside. I called out to ask where the other one was, but got no response. I went outside and called up to the treehouse. Jake poked his head out and said Sam had gone inside to use the bathroom, but when I checked the house, Sam wasn't there. I went back outside and asked Jake to come down so we could look for his brother together. Jake seemed confused and insisted that Sam had just been playing with him. But Sam was nowhere to be found in the treehouse either. Jake kept saying Sam must be hiding somewhere and that this was probably just a game, but I was starting to panic. I searched the entire house and yard, calling Sam's name the whole time. Jake was helping, but he seemed more annoyed than worried, like this was just his brother being annoying rather than something serious. After about 30 minutes of searching, I called Mrs. Henderson in a panic. She and her husband rushed home immediately. When they arrived, we searched the property again, this time with flashlights, but there was no sign of Sam anywhere. Mr. Henderson called the police while Mrs. Henderson stayed with Jake and me. Jake kept insisting that Sam had been playing with him in the treehouse just a little while ago, and that he couldn't understand where his brother had gone. The police arrived within 20 minutes and began a thorough search of the property and surrounding area. They questioned Jake extensively, but his story never changed. Sam had been playing with him in the treehouse and then just disappeared. Around midnight, one of the officers found Sam. He was sleeping peacefully in his bed like nothing had ever happened. When they woke him up, he was confused and groggy and claimed he had been sleeping for hours. But here's the thing that still bothers me to this day. I had checked that bedroom multiple times during my search. The bed had been empty. I'm absolutely certain of this because I even looked under the bed and in the closet. There was no way Sam could have been there the whole time. The police were baffled. Jake insisted Sam had been playing with him in the treehouse. Sam insisted he had gone to bed early and had been sleeping the whole time. Both boys seemed to be telling the truth as they understood it. Mrs. Henderson asked me to walk through exactly what had happened step by step. When I got to the part about seeing only one boy in the treehouse window, she got very quiet. After the police left, Mrs. Henderson told me something that made my skin crawl. She said that over the past few months she had noticed that when the boys were playing in the treehouse, sometimes she would see 3 figures moving around inside instead of 2. She had always assumed it was a trick of the light or shadows, but now she was wondering if something else might be going on. She asked me if I had ever seen anything strange while watching the boys play up there. I told her about the feeling of being watched from those windows, even when I knew the treehouse was empty. And I admitted that sometimes, when I was counting heads to make sure both boys were safe, I thought I saw more than 2 children up there. Mrs. Henderson decided that the treehouse was off limits until they could figure out what was happening. The boys were upset, but they didn't argue. I babysat for them one more time after that, but it was too creepy for me to continue. I kept staring at those treehouse windows, wondering what or who might be looking back at me. The Hendersons moved away about 6 months later. Mrs. Henderson told my mum that they had never been able to shake the feeling that something was wrong with that treehouse, and they didn't feel safe letting their boys play there anymore. I still don't know what happened to Sam that night, or how he ended up in his bed when I know he wasn't there earlier. But I'm convinced that whatever was in that treehouse wasn't just the boys' imagination. This happened about 3 years ago, when my family and I moved into a house in suburban Connecticut. The house was built in the 1950s and had been owned by the same family for over 40 years before we bought it. One of the selling points was this amazing treehouse in the backyard that the previous owners had built for their grandson. My daughter Emma was 10 at the time, and she was thrilled about having her own treehouse. It was really well maintained, with a solid wooden floor, walls on 3 sides, and even a small roof to keep the rain out. The previous owners had clearly taken good care of it. Emma started playing in the treehouse almost immediately after we moved in. She would spend hours up there reading, drawing, or just daydreaming. As a parent, I was happy she had found a space that she felt was truly her own. About 2 weeks after we moved in, Emma started talking about the old man who visited her in the treehouse. At first, I assumed she was talking about someone from the neighborhood, maybe the previous owner stopping by to check on his old property. But when I asked Emma to describe this old man, she said he was wearing clothes that looked old-fashioned and that he seemed sad. She said he would sit in the corner of the treehouse and watch her play, but he never said anything to her. I was immediately concerned about a stranger spending time with my daughter, so I asked Emma to point him out the next time she saw him. But whenever I looked up at the treehouse when Emma said the old man was there, I never saw anyone. This went on for several weeks. Emma would come inside and casually mention that the old man had been watching her again, but I never saw any evidence of an actual person. I started to think it might be an imaginary friend, which seemed normal enough for a 10-year-old adjusting to a new home. But then, Emma started telling me specific things the old man had said to her. According to Emma, his name was Mr. Peterson, and he had lived in our house a long time ago. He had built the treehouse for his grandson, but something sad had happened and the grandson had never been able to play in it. Mr. Peterson supposedly told Emma that he was happy to see a child enjoying the treehouse again, because that's what it had been built for. He also told her stories about what the neighborhood had been like when he was younger. I decided to do some research to see if there was any truth to what Emma was saying. I contacted the real estate agent who had handled our purchase and asked about the previous owners. What I learned made me very uncomfortable. The previous owners were indeed named Peterson, and Mr. Peterson had built the treehouse in the early 1990s for his grandson, who was supposed to come live with them. But the grandson had died in a car accident before he ever got to play in it. Mr. Peterson himself had died 2 years before we bought the house, which meant he couldn't possibly be visiting Emma in the treehouse. When I told my wife what I had learned, she suggested that maybe Emma had overheard someone talking about the previous owners and had incorporated that information into her imaginary friend story. Kids are good at picking up details and weaving them into their play, but then something happened that made me reconsider this explanation. I was working in the yard one Saturday afternoon when I heard Emma talking to someone up in the treehouse. I couldn't make out the words, but I could clearly hear 2 voices, Emma's high, childish voice and a deeper, older voice responding to her. I quietly walked closer to the tree and listened. Emma was asking questions about what the neighborhood had been like in the old days, and the other voice was answering with specific details about local businesses and families that I knew Emma couldn't possibly know. I climbed up the ladder as quietly as I could and peeked into the treehouse. Emma was sitting cross-legged on the floor, looking toward the corner where she always said Mr. Peterson sat. She was nodding and responding as if someone was talking to her. But the corner was empty, there was no one there. "Emma," I said softly, "who are you talking to?" She turned to look at me with surprise. "Mr. Peterson," she said, pointing to the empty corner. "He was just telling me about the old movie theater that used to be downtown." I looked at the corner where she was pointing. I didn't see anything, but I felt something. The temperature in that corner seemed noticeably colder than the rest of the treehouse, and there was this sense of presence that I can't really describe. "Mr. Peterson," I said, feeling ridiculous, "if you're here, Emma's parents would appreciate it if you would leave her alone." Emma looked shocked. "Dad, you can't tell him to leave. This is his treehouse. He built it." But the cold feeling in the corner disappeared, and Emma's expression changed from shock to sadness. "He's gone," she said quietly. "I think you hurt his feelings." Emma didn't talk about Mr. Peterson for several days after that. She still played in the treehouse, but she seemed subdued, like she was missing something important. Then, one evening, she came inside with tears in her eyes. She said Mr. Peterson had come back to say goodbye. He told her that he was happy she had been able to enjoy the treehouse, but that it was time for him to leave so our family could make it truly ours. According to Emma, Mr. Peterson said he had been staying around because he was sad that his grandson never got to play in the treehouse. But seeing Emma having so much fun there had helped him feel better about letting it go. Emma never saw Mr. Peterson again after that night. She continued to love the treehouse, but the atmosphere up there felt different somehow, lighter, less melancholy. I still don't know whether Emma was really communicating with the spirit of the previous owner, or whether she had created an elaborate imaginary relationship based on details she had somehow picked up about the house's history. But I do know that after that final conversation, Emma seemed more settled in our new home. It was like she had been helping Mr. Peterson find peace, and in doing so, had found her own place in the house he had loved so much.